Everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. It's here. It's play-in night. Lakers versus Timberwolves at the Crypt. We're previewing it with Locked On Wolves host Ben Beecken. That is next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome everybody. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky from Locked On Lakers, Ben Beecken from Locked On Wolves. It's here. The sort of playoffs. It's Lakers versus Timberwolves at the Crypt Tuesday night. And I'm excited. Everyone else is excited. I have to ask though, what the hell is going on with the Timberwolves?
I couldn't tell. I mean, like, who knows? It's never a dull moment. It's always a roller coaster. And in a lot of ways, what happened Sunday, I take your pick of the like three different storylines that everyone's talking about nationally about the Wolves, which doesn't only happens when something terrible happens, right? It's a microcosm of the season for the Wolves. Honestly, that's the best way I can put Sunday in a nutshell.
Like, how much, if at all, did it feel like this has been something building with Rudy Gobert? Because it feels telling that he's the only one that got disciplined, despite it being well reported and not disputed that, if anything, Kyle Anderson may have been the one who crossed the line more in terms of the stuff being said.
Right. For people who might have missed it, if somehow you've been under a rock for the last 48 hours or so, Rudy Gobert punched Kyle Anderson in a sideline huddle during Sunday's regular season finale against the Pelicans. He has been suspended for Tuesday's game.
And this is on top of Jaden McDaniels not being available because he punched a wall. He didn't get suspended for doing that, but he broke his hand.
You guys were real fighty on Sunday. Very fighty. Very punchy.
A lot of punches. Yeah, a lot of punches. And I guess you're right. The reporting is all that everything. Nothing has really been reported what Rudy Gobert said. It's only what Kyle Anderson said, but we all saw what Rudy Gobert did, which was he tried to punch and I guess kind of connected with Kyle Anderson's chest, shoulder area. I think that there's Rudy Gobert is kind of a, there's this underlying narrative about whether or not he's a good locker room guy. Like, there were mixed reports when the Wolves traded for him. And there's all these guys that vouch for him. The Wolves brought Dell Demps into the front office. He was an assistant coach with the Jazz when Gobert was there, and he spoke highly of him, of course. And Mike Conley came over and said great things about him. And, but it does always kind of feel like there's a little bit of an undercurrent there where, not everyone's D'Angelo Russell was actually one who it wasn't really a secret that D'Lo and Rudy Gobert did not really see eye to eye on or off the floor. But at the same time, there was never anything like tangible reported, like, hey, everyone's unhappy with Rudy or anything like that. So I don't, and everyone said the right things after the game. Kyle Anderson, Mike Conley, the two probably, veteran voices that you're going to want to hear from, both kind of said almost identical things. Like, hey, we're men, we're adults, we're already past this. Rudy's apologized via text. Like, we'll be all right. We'll move forward. So, we'll see if that's really true. But yeah, it was, it's maybe a little bit telling. The obvious thing that the Wolves can lean on is Gobert was the one who threw a punch. And so that would be the reason he was sent home. He was suspended. I think the Wolves can lean on that.
I would say that the narrative, certainly on social media throughout Monday, late Sunday into Monday, all that kind of stuff, was that no McDaniels. That obviously hurts Minnesota's perimeter defense. No Gobert. Some people think that isn't such a big loss, but at the very least, you're down a center, and without Naz Reid, you're short on big people. That this has a really big impact, obviously, on the game, and it basically hands it to the Lakers. I saw a lot of Lakers fans, though, because we're a frightened bunch right now and not necessarily used to prosperity, noting that the Wolves were significantly better in the second half without Gobert on the floor.
Sure.
And that schematically, it might actually help them out a little bit because it takes Anthony Davis further away from the basket. He's got to,
Sure.
run around with Karl-Anthony Towns, maybe all this kind of stuff. When you get down to it, with all the guys missing, Is Gobert, let's start with him. Is Gobert being gone a loss for Minnesota, or is it kind of a sneaky gain?
I mean, I think it's unequivocally a loss. I would say this even if Naz Reid was healthy and if Jaden McDaniels was healthy, because Rudy Gobert is still a good player. But it's even a bigger deal, or an even bigger deal, I should say, with no Naz and also with no Jaden McDaniels, because now you're talking Rudy and Cat play together a bunch. They start together, but with no Rudy, you call him your first string center. He's gone. Naz is your backup center. He's gone. So it's just Karl-Anthony Towns. And then you're playing Kyle Anderson at the 5, or you're playing Nate Knight, or you're playing Luka Garza at the backup 5. And Karl-Anthony Towns is one of the most foul prone players in the entire NBA, has been for the last several years. So that's the biggest issue. I would say to Lakers fans that may have caught, the second half of that game Sunday, the Pelicans just aren't a good matchup for Rudy Gobert. That's part of it. Valanciunas only played 22 minutes. The Wolves struggle with him, but besides that, the Pelicans eat up drop coverage, and that's what Rudy wants to play. And Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum kind of had their way in the mid range, or at least were able to when he was in the game. And the Wolves were a little more creative defensively with no Gobert. But I mean, Gobert's played pretty well in general against the Lakers this year. I know Anthony Davis had, I think, 38 against the Wolves the last time the two teams played. But earlier in the season, I mean, Gobert had a 22-14 the last time they played the Lakers, and that was Anthony Davis played in that game. That was post trade deadline as well. So, I mean, Rudy's played pretty well against the Lakers. He's still a plus defender. He's still a huge part of what the Wolves do defensively. And maybe the biggest thing is now the depth is completely gone in the front court for Minnesota, and Cat is foul prone. And he, like, as great as he is, and as possibly even more touches as he'll get, which is a good thing offensively. If he picks up 2 quick fouls, if he picks up 3 quick fouls, completely changes the dynamic of the game.
Yeah, I was going to ask with Jaden McDaniels not being there and him being, I think, at least one of, if not the primary guy that you would be looking to put on LeBron, and the combination of no Gobert and no Naz Reid, just in terms of guys that would be occupying Anthony Davis in some fashion. What do you expect the Wolves to do now that they're lacking so much size?
That's a great question. I don't know what they're going to do with LeBron. I mean, kind of like all season, it's been, McDaniels takes the primary offensive option on the other team, and then Anthony Edwards would often take the second, unless it's a point guard, in which case a lot of times Ant would take on that responsibility. Ant is a legit plus on-ball defender, but the advantage, he's really good on the ball. But and I think a lot of people might have seen that sequence at the end of the Pelicans game. He strips Brandon Ingram, gets the end one on the other end. Like he can. No,
he's improved a ton.
Yes, and that started like mid last season. I mean, he loved that John Morant matchup in the playoffs, and he wants those matchups. The problem is, and the reason why even the defensive metrics would agree for the most part, he's a plus defender, but he gets dinged because like Saturday when they played the Spurs, I don't think he contested a shot for like half the game. He needs that matchup to get him going defensively. And he's still kind of, back and forth off the ball in terms of his consistency or lack thereof. But a lot of the advantage that Ant has on guards is size, and he doesn't have that advantage if he's guarding LeBron James. So, I'm not 100% sure. I would think it's Kyle Anderson is probably the one that they're going to say, hey, go give us your best and we'll, try and bring help. Kyle Anderson's kind of the Swiss Army knife that they hand the toughest assignments, and it may legitimately be backup center in this game too, depending on how much they're willing to, Chris Finch is willing or not willing to play Nate Knight and Luka Garza. And by the way, Knight and Garza have been pretty good when in their limited time this season, but things get exposed in a single game play-in or in a playoff series, and there's a reason both those guys are third string centers in the league. But anyway, I think we'll see a lot of Kyle Anderson on LeBron. Taurean Prince, to a lesser extent, he's, I think, lost a half step defensively and has struggled some in isolation this year defensively. But it's going to be just kind of throw everything at him and make somebody else beat you. And you put Mike Conley on D'Angelo Russell, and you hope he can hold his own. That's probably the strategy.
The other thing, Ben, that I've been seeing a lot of is, this is, and obviously, it's social media, but it's up to Anthony Edwards. It's an Anthony Edwards huge game, and he's capable of putting up, 45 or 50 and whatever. And no talk of Karl-Anthony Towns, who, by the way, is listed as questionable for the game on Tuesday. But let's just assume that he plays.
He's been questionable the last 3 or 4 games, correct? Heading into it with that calf.
Yep.
Okay.
Where is Cat like in this conversation? And why do you think he is kind of being overlooked? At least it seemed like to me. And because a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we were talking about like, can Karl-Anthony Towns lead this? And he's Karl-Anthony Towns. So what's going on here with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get full like national small market conspiracy theory thing or deal here on you guys, but it is true. Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert are two of the best. Like, I mean, they're both unequivocally probably top 25 players, maybe top 30. I mean, I could argue probably they're right around the 20th to 25th best players. And they're as maligned as you could be for guys who have both made multiple All-NBA teams. Like, nobody wants to talk about them in a positive way nationally. Like, I mean, you're 100% right. Like, when was the last time we heard? Now, granted, he missed 52 games in the middle of the season. But even lately, like, he dropped, I think he had 30 in the game on Sunday. He had a stretch where he scored 9 of 11 points for the Wolves, hit a 3 from the logo. Like, it was as the Wolves were kind of surging past the Pelicans in the early fourth quarter. And of course, it was overshadowed by all the punches and everything that we talked about earlier. And Ant had the stretch at the end of the game, but like, you're not in that position if Karl-Anthony Towns doesn't just decide, hey, I'm going to take over right here. Because Ant was 2 of 10 at halftime. He had 6 points at halftime, 8 turnovers for the game, which nobody wanted to talk about either. Karl-Anthony Towns is far steadier at this point than Anthony Edwards. And he's still the better all-around player. I don't think there's any question about that. And really, you're going to see probably, I would guess, more than half the Wolves offense runs through Karl-Anthony Towns on Tuesday night. They do a lot of posting up, a lot of mid-post stuff with Towns. He can score in a variety of ways. He can play back to the basket. He can initiate from the top, and that's what he did a lot of last year. He did far more attacking off the dribble than he did spot up shooting or post ups last season. And so perhaps the Wolves get back to some of that. But Towns has been pretty good since he came back from injury. He had a couple of game-winning free throws, clutch. He hit a clutch 3 late in the game to give the Wolves a win. And yet the story is still Anthony Edwards because obviously he's still he's 21. It's so exciting. What could his ceiling be? And I get all that, and I obviously love Anthony Edwards, but Karl-Anthony Towns is still the best player on this team, and he was the best player on the floor, all things considered. Even if Ant had the most jaw-dropping stretch late in that game, all things considered, Cat was the best player on the floor on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as somebody who's covered Anthony Davis now for a few years, covered Pau Gasol for several years. Some of this can come down to just the vibe that you put out. Like Anthony Edwards, and I love Anthony Edwards. He is going to be a great player for a long time. He puts out more of a killer vibe than Karl-Anthony Towns. And, it gets accentuated by his performance in Hustle, where he played like the psychologically bullying opponent of Hernan Gomez. And by the way, Ant was totally convincing in that role. Like he was so convincing. We had a film critic on our show last year who happens to be Amy Nicholson. She's a huge Laker fan on top of being a film critic for the New York Times. She did not even realize that Anthony Edwards was a basketball player. She just thought he was a damn good actor. Like, that's how good he was. So I think that can speak to some of what I think Brian was asking about in your answering. Just sometimes it's just the vibe that you put out there.
Yeah.
All right. So that's us picking your brain on the Timberwolves side. Next, you're going to fire some questions at us about the Lakers, what we're expecting to see on Tuesday night. More crossover Lakers Timberwolves Tuesday night next.
Locked on Lakers and Locked on Wolves brought to you by Game Time. Years ago, some friends of mine and I, we wanted to go see LL Cool J in LA. At the really last minute, we didn't know how to get tickets. We ended up buying from a scalper, and they were fake. We ended up through just total luck getting into this show, but I vowed never again after that, because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful, and that's why I love Game Time, the fast, easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy shows, theater near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped for the fun. And I love how Game Time offers images of the seat views, because there's nothing worse than a bad angle. They got the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, even job loss protection. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. And if you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, the tickets go directly to your phone and you're set. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
All right, turning the tables a little bit, just talking a few questions about the Lakers. The Wolves actually only saw the Lakers 3 times this year, so Wolves fans may not have seen a ton of them, unless I think we have likely some Wolves fans kind of hate/love watching the Lakers, depending on how you feel about all the former Wolves that have been through LA this season. And Andy and I talked several weeks ago now about D'Angelo Russell, and we ended last segment talking about D'Lo. So I think that's a pretty good place to start. How has D'Angelo Russell been in general from a Lakers fan perspective? And I guess playing that into a fan perspective and also from your guys' perspective, how has the fan base taken to him in his reintroduction to LA? How has he performed as a Laker? And also in this matchup, I mean, what role is he playing? How important is he offensively to the Lakers game plan?
Well, I think Laker fans have often been wanting more from D'Angelo Russell, but I mean, literally like on the court more. He's missed a fair amount of games since they acquired him, but when he's played, he's actually been really good. And Brian and I have talked about this a lot since the trade deadline. His energy and his enthusiasm has often been extremely contagious and infectious for this team. He actually talked after the Utah win that solidified the 7 seed about the energy that it felt like he and the other new guys post-trade deadline brought to a team that, at the risk of sounding judgy, could really have used it. He's also talked about how he and Austin Reeves, who are now the starting backcourt, he's gone out of his way to compliment the hell out of Reeves and how much he loves playing with him. He's often been a real difference maker for this team. And there's a dynamic presence that he has, both in an ability to set up players for shots, but also to his ability to play off ball. And like that you can find utility from him just spacing the floor or sometimes cutting. Defensively, I think he's been fine. I know he does not have a great reputation defensively, but, the Lakers have been very good since the trade deadline defensively. So even acknowledging that he's missed a bunch of games, he hasn't hurt anything on that end either. He's been trusted to close games when he's been available. And I think a lot of fans, they're excited by what they've seen as maturity since he's come back. And, it's, I think, sometimes easy to forget just how young D'Angelo Russell was when this team drafted him. And he was young for his age. He was a very young 19-year-old as opposed to, say, Brandon Ingram or Julius Randle, who were very old 19-year-olds. But I think Laker fans have been very happy with him. I think Laker fans would like to see him re-signed. So far, so good.
That's so interesting. I feel like that was one of the things that I kind of remember that when the Wolves traded for D'Lo, and it was like 2 weeks before the season halted because of COVID back in 2020. But I feel like I remember that sort of a thing right away where it was like, this is exciting. Like, this is a guy who's been an all-star, like he can score a bunch, but he also had like his vibe was just more positive. And it kind of, waxed and waned, I think, over his time in Minnesota. And this year, I think it was maybe the Rudy dynamic that accelerated that, the lack of having Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor, some of those things. And I mean, a couple of the points you made related to on-court, like when he can be an average defender, and that's all you need him to be, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you don't need him to be much more. He's a big body. He's a smart player. Like, you just need him to try defensively and hit, he could play off ball. And so that's a really good fit with LeBron. From an on-court perspective, I do think that fit totally makes sense. In general, the Lakers have played really well lately. They've won, I think, 9 out of their last 11. What would you guys say the Lakers have done best, since over the last, call it 3 weeks or so, over the course of this winning streak with guys in and out of the lineup, obviously LeBron injury, D'Lo being in and out. what has been the best thing that they've done over the last few weeks that they didn't do early this year that could potentially carry into the play-in and potentially the playoffs?
Well, I think there's no question the defense since the trade deadline has been what turned this thing around. Like the offense has been better. They shoot the ball better. Anthony Davis has been better. But what fundamentally changed the Lakers was defense. I don't know where they finished, but for a long stretch of the post-deadline time, they were the best defensive team, or top two or top three, depending on what metric you're using and whose metric in the league. And they have been able to get stops up until the last 3 or 4 or 5 games, I think, because the fatigue factor of having to win all these games and only having a few games that they could give up and all that kind of stuff, playing without LeBron, playing without Anthony Davis, playing without D'Lo. I do think it's caught up to them a little bit over the last week or so of the season, the end of that road trip and then coming back home. But unequivocally, it's defense that has changed for the Lakers since the deadline.
Yeah, actually, I think we saw a really good example of that defense in the recent game against the Timberwolves that the Lakers won in Minnesota. Rui Hachimura, his defense against Karl-Anthony Towns was game-changing. And his ability to bother Cat from keeping him from getting to the spots that he wanted. Rui actually has been better defensively than either one of us expected or his reputation. Like, he's not a brilliant defender, but he is much better than expected. Jared Vanderbilt, particularly when LeBron is available, he's able to serve now as this very versatile, disruptive defensive wing, which he can be very, very good at. D'Lo ending up with the team, put Dennis Schroeder now off the bench, so Schroeder can bring that point of attack defense to the second unit. He is extremely disruptive and had been disruptive in that game against the Timberwolves. And then AD's the anchor of it all. And he's at the top of his game. Anthony Davis is as big of a game changer defensively as anybody in the league. And then with everybody, I think, slotted correctly at full strength with the new additions, they've been able to mix and match parts of their defense to, I think, strengthen both units. Like Austin Reeves got moved into the starting lineup. He's one of their better defenders, but Troy Brown is now part of the bench, and he can be solid defensively there. They're just top to bottom now, much better equipped defensively, and I'd even say better defensively than you might have thought on paper before all this stuff began.
Yeah, and something that in terms of this matchup, I guess related to that, the Wolves rely heavily on they don't do a great job at getting to the free throw line, but when they are, the offense becomes much more efficient. The Wolves offense has actually, if you look at where the Wolves and Lakers finished in terms of offensive and defensive rating, they're in similar places. The Wolves also were far better defensively this year. A key to the Wolves offense is like, hey, if Ant's getting to the basket, if he's getting to the line, you'll be all right. If Karl-Anthony Towns is on the floor and not in foul trouble, the offense is going to be much better. On the flip side, the Timberwolves foul a ton. We talked about this specifically in regard to Karl-Anthony Towns earlier, but as a team, and I guess, Jaden McDaniels for this game, obviously, either with the broken hand, and he gets into foul trouble a lot, but he's also the Wolves' best overall defender. So I don't think that changes. I think the Wolves will commit a bunch of fouls. The Lakers are great at drawing fouls. I think they were second in free throw rate this year. Across the 3 games between the Wolves and Lakers, LA has a plus 19 in terms of free throw attempt differential. That's not made free throws. That's just attempts over the 3 games. And that's not really an anomaly because of who the Lakers are offensively and who the Wolves are defensively. What's the biggest key from your guys' perspective in this matchup? Is it something along those lines? Is there something that the Wolves have that you guys perceive as a strength that you'd be worried about how it matches up with the Lakers' weakness, or what are you guys looking at, the headline in terms of the matchup?
Yeah, I think like the Lakers, even with the addition of Russell and Beasley, they're still not a particularly great 3-point shooting team. They've gotten better, and some nights are better than others, but they're not really high volume. So even when they're shooting the ball well, they're not necessarily going to make a ton of threes because they don't necessarily take a ton, but they do get to the line a bunch. They're not a great free throw shooting team. So if they're above percentage there, that's really, so I always kind of look at it as like the Lakers can get away with not getting they can sort of not get to the line if they're making a couple extra threes. They can turn the ball, they can avoid, maybe not shoot the ball so well, and maybe not have the amount of free throws if they don't turn the ball over. It's like some combination, like 2 out of 3 of don't turn the ball over, make your 3-pointers, get to the free throw line. Any 2 of those 3 things generally plays pretty well for the Lakers because, like you say, they don't send other teams, and even when they're not defending well, you'll just tend to get straight buckets against the Lakers or get them in transition. You're not going to get those points, generally speaking, at the free throw line.
And Minnesota, by the way, too, one last thing that popped in my mind when Brian was mentioning about like limiting your own mistakes. The Lakers can be very prone to turnovers and often self-induced turnovers. And if the Wolves are good at capitalizing on that, that can be something that they can get some points or just steal away for some possessions from the Lakers, but also too, maybe start bothering the Lakers into second guessing themselves, altering what they're doing out there too much because they're just turning the ball over too often.
Yeah, and the Wolves are a very volatile transition team as well. I mean, they've gone through stretches where they've been terrible turnovers this year. They finished the year like bottom 3 in terms of turnover rate, but also transition offense and defense. You'd think the Wolves would be a great transition team with how athletic, and now you're down McDaniels, but with Anthony Edwards, you just kind of assume they'd be good in transition, but they have not been great on either end of the floor in transition. So that's one of those things that could crop up in a game like this too. Last question for you guys. I think more of a fun question to be answered for Timberwolves fans who, like, let's be honest. I mean, the Wolves have made the playoffs now. Well, technically they're still out of the playoffs. We'll count this 3 times in the last 19 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. So
wow.
I count it. I'll count it.
I don't.
I mean, even if we don't, 2 times in the last 18 years, we'll call it that.
I mean, I wouldn't hang a banner, but I'll call this the playoffs. Sure.
I mean, who's counting? I mean, all Timberwolves fans, we're all counting. Like, it's the last time the Wolves won a playoff series was 2004 when they lost to the Lakers in the conference finals.
I remember.
Yeah. So anyway, last year's team still holds. Let's change the subject a little bit away from that. Last year's team still holds a place in everybody's heart in Minnesota because it was exciting, it was fun, it was new, it was Anta's kind of the new face of the franchise, and then of course they went and flipped half the roster. And most of those guys have worn a Lakers jersey at some point this year. So I guess we could take this one of 2 ways. The 2 ways the 2 things I'm curious about are which former Timberwolves players had the greatest overall impact versus expectations. And we talked a little about D'Lo and that he's been injured and things like that. So there's obviously Vanderbilt and Beasley, or who may have the biggest impact in Tuesday's game in the play-in. I think Wolves fans will be will really be torn because honestly, like, especially Vanderbilt and Beasley, those guys were huge parts of what the Wolves did last year. And I know losing in the first round of the playoffs is not like doing something for most franchises, but going to game 6 and after winning a play-in was significant. So anyway, of those players, who do you guys anticipate having the biggest impact in the play-in?
I'm going to say Jared Vanderbilt, because like I said, I think that defense on Anthony Edwards is really, really key to potentially just neutralizing Minnesota from being able to do anything.
I think Vanderbilt's a good answer. I feel like D'Lo is a good answer too, because like it could kind of go one way or the other. Like I feel like if the Lakers lose, I feel like there's a good chance D'Lo went 4 for 14, 2 for 13, something like that. And if they win, I feel like there's a good chance he hit 3 or 4 threes and kind of did exactly what you did. So I think the Vanderbilt answer is an excellent one. I will go there, and I will say this: if Beasley is 4 of 7 in this game, it's over. Like there's 0% chance that the Wolves are going to win. If Beasley is hitting shots, that opens up the Lakers offense in tremendous ways that I don't think Minnesota will have an answer for.
And he's one of those super streaky players. When he's hot, he doesn't miss.
We've noticed then.
Yes.
And the ball barely touches the floor. Like he catches it and he shoots it. Like that's what it's just all one motion, catch and shoot, catch and shoot, catch and shoot. And when he doesn't have it, he's just trying to find it. And that, you guys know.
Oh yeah, we've seen it.
Yeah.
It is a huge game. It is an intriguing game, particularly given everything that's gone on. Two very excited fan bases to be back in this, and really appreciate it. This is fun.
All right, today's episode of both Locked On Lakers and Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at PrizePicks. We talked a little bit about Malik Beasley shooting through. I'll be honest, I think if you take Malik Beasley over on three-pointers made, I think you'd be in good shape at PrizePicks. Hopefully the Wolves still win, obviously, but it feels like Malik is also out for revenge, just like Jared Vanderbilt. If you're wondering how PrizePicks works, it's extremely easy. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll score more or less than their PrizePicks projections, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That, of course, includes the NBA as well as MLB, underway currently NHL playoffs, PGA, big tournament last weekend, college sports, any college sport really. You can make your entry in less than 60 seconds. It really is that easy. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100.
All right, so thanks again to Ben for taking the time to get us ready for that game tonight. So much to consider. I know, Andy, Lakers are overwhelming favorites in this game, it seems like. What stuck out to you in terms of, the what Ben said regarding the Wolves, particularly as it relates to tonight's game?
Just how few options I feel like Minnesota has to really impose their will on this game stylistically and to really dictate the terms of the game. Like unless Karl-Anthony Towns can get Anthony Davis into foul trouble, or LeBron, who rarely if ever gets into foul trouble, like unless something very unusual or unexpected happens, there's just very little for Minnesota, I think, that's in front of them to dictate the terms of this game, to play quote unquote their way. I don't even know if Minnesota has their way to play in this game. Like, it feels like they're going to have to accept the terms dictated to them, by their own misfortunes and by the Lakers, and roll with them as best as possible. It feels like the idea of the Lakers getting put into a place of disadvantage. It's hard to imagine how that will happen.
It's funny. Like I think that the Lakers are not, the Wolves are not going to make this easy for the Lakers. I do not think this is going to be a walkover game. They've still got Karl-Anthony Towns. They've still got Anthony Edwards. They've still got Mike Conley. They've still got Kyle Anderson, who's a really good player. And so, I don't think this is a walk in any stretch of the imagination. But I thought his point about Gobert, and I'm not a Rudy hater. I mean, as a player, the guy, he seems like he's got some issues, but he's flawed, and that trade's not going to work out for them the way that they want. But he's still a guy who presents issues when he's playing well, when he's healthy, and all that. And I think Ben's point about how against the Lakers not having Gobert there is a problem. Maybe there's a different matchup where it isn't, but in this game that they're playing, I agree with him. I don't see how this doesn't benefit the Lakers greatly, because Minnesota, like you said, has to play small. Like, they have no choice now but to play small. The Lakers, think about how much more aggressive they can be defensively, because you don't have to worry about Rudy Gobert swallowing up Anthony Edwards misses or something like that, and putbacks and things like that. That's kind of its own form of gravity. And then you can attack the rim much harder and with much more freedom if Gobert is not there. Even if he's a 70% of the Stifle Tower, at his peak, that's still something. And
it also
Naz Reid.
Yeah, I was going to say they also can attack the rim so frequently, because Karl-Anthony Towns is going to have to pick his spots in terms of when he wants to risk fouling.
Right, he's not a rim protector anyway.
Sure, but even if he wants to be in this game or sees the necessity of it in this game, he has to be really careful because the back line behind him is basically non-existent.
Yep.
Unless one of their third string centers has like the game of their life. So, the Lakers need to be disciplined and focused because we've seen over the last 4 or 5 games when they're not playing that way, they can allow lesser opponents to make a game more complicated than it should be. But if the Lakers are playing focused, disciplined basketball, even if this isn't a walkover, this should be a game that they are able to control for the overwhelming majority of it.
Yeah, I think, it is, there's the cliche, Andy, the wounded animal is the most dangerous animal in the animal kingdom. And that, of course, is untrue. Wounded animals get eaten first.
They're the most vulnerable.
Yeah. I don't think, like I said, Minnesota's still got plenty of talent left on this roster. They are not like dead. they're not that wounded, but the Lakers ought to be better on their home floor. And like I said, in the last segment to Ben, like I feel like if the Lakers can do sort of the Minnesota will set a bar, and if the Lakers can take care of the ball, shoot well enough from 3, get to the free throw line, 2 of those 3 things, and nothing really weird happens, I think they get the days off. And I don't want to look ahead. I don't want to look ahead to a first round series against Memphis, which would start, I think, Sunday is where the NBA has got it. But like the opportunity for the Lakers to get Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and travel probably Friday to Memphis and chillax on Saturday, do a light walkthrough or something like that. Like if you want to turn the the hot take or narrative or whatever, the Lakers having being a real sleeper or having a real chance, or even like some people I've seen call them like one of the 2 or 3 favorites in the West or something. If you want that to be a real thing, it probably requires 3 or 4 days off between games so that everybody can heal.
But remains to be seen what happens. I have a feeling that LeBron and AD especially are going to be cognizant of that. And I'm going to be like, I will be damned if I have to do this again on Thursday. We are not effing around. That alone, I think, will be enough of a motivating, focusing factor, and why I am predicting the Lakers are going to win this game.
I think the first 6 minutes of this game, 5-6 minutes, the Lakers can get out to an early lead like they did against Utah on Sunday. They will inevitably give it up because most NBA games, that's what happens. You get an 8-point lead, a 10-point lead or whatever, and the other team makes a run. And that's how this works. But if the Lakers are playing uphill the entire day, that's a different thing. If they can get out to a good first quarter, finish the first quarter up 6 or 7, that they can absorb that run that's going to come at some point from Minnesota. I think they'll be able to do it. I'm trying not to be irrationally confident about what the Lakers can be, but it's given everything that's gone on with Minnesota's galvanized as they're going to be, as fired up as they're going to be to prove everybody that they can stuff whatever. They're talent shy on for this game on Tuesday, not by a ton, and they're not talent free, but they're talent shy for a game like this if the Lakers play up to their capabilities. I agree. I think they're going to win. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to see the show. Almost 15,000 subscribers. That is a lot of subscribers. 15,000 people. That's like an arena full of people who subscribe to this podcast. We appreciate everybody's support there. We will be back, of course, after Tuesday night's game, hopefully celebrating a Lakers win and a few games off. But we'll see everybody after the game.